So we're going to have more homelessness, more unemployment, and the government has to print more money. A capitalist is somebody who believes in teaching people to fish.
Right.
And a socialist wants to give people fish.
Yeah.
And then I just divide them that way. And so also what's happening with your generation and actually with Gen X, the income of men is dropping.
You mentioned the energy crisis, climate crisis, COVID crisis, refugee crisis, and what you call the 800-pound gorilla.
Yeah, it's what I call the superinflation. Don't talk about hyperinflation. You know, hyperinflation is very rare. Inflation of 10% or more. And then because of the superinflation, we get a food crisis as well. You know, this is very scary. Next, we'll have a food crisis because food is connected to energy. And we had the CEO of a large Norwegian company, a food company, or actually they produce fertilizers. And they warned that to produce fertilizers, which we need to grow food, the cost price of making this fertilizer, especially ammoniac, has grown by tenfold. It used to be $100 for one amount of fertilizer to produce, and now it's $1,000. So he's warning about a food crisis, which will be next. And you know, China has been advising over 1 billion people to stock up food supplies. That's weird. That's scary.
The baby boomers have only known an up market. And now the end is near. They're starting to retire out just as the market is topping. China's coming down. We have trouble in Europe. I'm just watching this whole thing going, what's going to happen to the boomers? Because they actually had it the easiest of any generation I've ever seen. We're going into one of the roughest periods of humanity right now. And the problem is, from my perspective, is the dollar. And so if you understand the dollar, US dollar versus the loonie, it was created in 1913, but so was the tax department created in 1913.
Right.
So what they're going to do, we have so much debt today, they're going to have to keep printing. But every time they do that, it creates more poverty. The system is failing.
Yeah.
So we're going to have more homelessness, more unemployment, and the government has to print more money. A capitalist is somebody who believes in teaching people to fish.
Right.
And a socialist wants to give people fish.
Yeah.
And then I just divide them that way. And so also what's happening with your generation and actually with Gen X, the income of men is dropping.
When all prices go up, when stock exchanges are hitting all-time highs every day, when real estate is making records, you know, when prices of all major important assets keep rising, we're not getting richer. It means the money is getting, we're losing the purchasing power of money. It's the debasement of currency. It's a huge warning sign that money is dying. This is very, very serious. And it's very hard to stop this. Once you get the spiral that people lose trust in cash and bonds and start moving their money to all the government can't print. Actually, we've been telling people, you know, for the last 10 years, buy all the government can't print. And now people are starting to do this worldwide. And that's very hard to stop.
Marx had one thing, so it was the abolition of private property. In other words, we could own nothing. So they wanted to take all of our private property away, and it would then go to the state. And that's why when you study communism and Marxism, it's a centralized economy. It's called, in military terms, it's called command and control. I went to military school. So it's a command and control economy where the government tells you everything. And so that's why the Federal Reserve Bank is part of a communist bank. It's a central bank. And the central bank is not American, it's not a bank, and there's no reserves in it. And it's the Fed today, in 2021, is the third central bank. And for history, since Jefferson and those guys, they kept saying, we cannot have central banks. But because our academic system is basically Marxist, you know, most school teachers are Marxists, they just don't know it.
One of the best signs of that was a tweet by a Dutch former central banker, and his name is Lex Hoogduin. I know him well, and he tweeted last month that the ECB is trapped. And he's a former central banker. He's been running around in those circles for decades. And when the ECB is trapped, and of course they are, because they can't lower or they can't raise interest rates, what they would need to do to conquer the inflation, to combat the inflation. But they can't raise interest rates because there's so much debt out there. So, and when the ECB is trapped, the Fed is trapped as well, and the Bank of they're all trapped now, and they understand. And what's very telling, that the Bundesbank president, the German central bank president, he's leaving. We had the news yesterday that one of the New York Fed governors is leaving. So that's very telling, you know. It's getting scary, you know. We talked about this for years. I warned our audience for 20 years that one day we'll reach the point that you can't ignore this any longer. You know, this was laughed about, and now we're here. You can't ignore it any longer. I meet rich people every day. This morning, I met a guy. He sold his company, 40 million in cash. He doesn't know what to do.
I think fake money or fiat currency is in serious trouble right now. And so when we're talking about gold, silver, and Bitcoin, I'm not buying gold, silver, Bitcoin. I just don't trust our government. You know, and they're going to have to start printing pretty quickly. And the more they print, the less value, purchasing power the dollar has, or the loonie, or the yen, or the peso. So that kind of says it's not a bet for gold, silver, Bitcoin. It's a bet against our government.
We need to find a new anchor for world's financial system, because we'll have a dollar crisis as well. We haven't even mentioned that. We need debt restructurings, but I also said we need a gold revaluation, because that's the trick the central bankers still have available. That's the card they still have in their sleeve, and they used that before. They used it in the 1930s. So all central banks in the world still own gold. They still have gold on the balance sheet. So when you revalue gold, you can reset your balance sheet for central banks. And that's why central banks will never use Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, they don't own Bitcoin. There's no use for central banks to start using Bitcoin, but there is a use to start using gold again. And by adding gold to the official, to reinstate the connection between fiat money and gold, they can bring trust back into the system.